Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to, on the behalf of the City of New Bedford and the Veterans Advisory Board, I'd like to congratulate and welcome you to New Bedford for our annual Exercise Tiger service. This year is rather special for us because it's the 75th anniversary, but then also a little melancholy because many of the actual survivors that we had attend each year with us, we've lost the last two in the past few months. Mayor Mitchell, permission to post the colors?
Post the colors.
Color guard, post colors.
Keep heel.
Please remain standing. I will now bring forward Miss Madison Roy for the singing of our national anthem.
So proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing as we acknowledge our most faithful allies of the United Kingdom. The flag has been presented by Mr. Paul Marr, for the retiree of the British Royal Marines, and the British Airborne Royal Ulster Rifle Battalion that is standing outside. At this time, the invocation will be read by Mr. Bruce Duat, member of the Veterans Advisory Board.
The Army Prayer. O Lord God of hosts, stretch forth, we pray thee, thine almighty arm to strengthen and protect the soldiers of our country. Support them in the day of battle, and in the time of peace, keep them safe from all evil. Endue them with courage and loyalty, and grant that in all things they may serve without reproach, as seeing thee who art invisible, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you. Please be seated. Good afternoon. My name's Pete Clark. I'm the chairman of the Exercise Tiger Memorial Committee and member of the Veterans Advisory Board. I'd like to welcome you all for coming. It's a really special event that we have planned for you today. We're lucky enough to have some great guest speakers, some outstanding local elected officials, and we look forward to giving you a nice service today. So thank you for attending. I'd like to acknowledge Congressman Keating, Mayor Mitchell, Representatives Chris Hendricks, Representatives Tony Cabral, Representatives Paul Schmidt, Councilors Brian Gomes, Naomi Carney, Ian Abreu, and Brad Markey of Ward 1. And we also have former Mayor Scott Lang in attendance, so thank you all for coming. In the preparation for the invasion of Europe, 2 major dress rehearsals were scheduled, one of which was for the United States 7th Corps, which included 30,000 service members. The assault exercises were held at Slapton Sands west of Vaughan, a beach area which was located along the southern coast of England that resembled the conditions expected in the actual invasion on one of the 5 beaches of Normandy. In calm seas and in fair visibility during the early morning hours of April 28, 1944, following a pre-darkness simulated assault by forces of the 4th Infantry Division, one of the convoys, a flotilla of 8 LSTs, cruised the English Channel. They were fully loaded with a force of engineers, chemical, and quartermaster troops, not scheduled for the assault, but to be unloaded in an orderly fashion, along with trucks, amphibious vehicles, jeeps, and heavy engineering equipment. For this realistic training exercise, the commanders had ordered the use of live naval and artillery fire. In addition, the soldiers and sailors had live ammunition for their rifles and machine guns. During the exercise, 9 German E-boats, torpedo boats, out of Cherbourg, France, learning of heavy radio traffic, were ordered to investigate the area. The night was broken by a call to general quarters on the LSTs as explosions and gunfires filled the sky. In the confusion of whether this was part of the practice assault or an attack, a great deal of response consisted of anti-aircraft fire aimed at enemy aircraft that did not exist. In reality, the German torpedoes hit 3 LSTs, causing 2 to sink and badly damage another, which eventually limped back to port. Many soldiers and sailors were below deck and drowned, while others succumbed to the cold water. Contributing to these losses were the waterlogged overcoats and misplaced life belts that added to the number of casualties. There was also a lack of escort vehicles, and typographical errors put the LSTs on the wrong radio frequency. The final tally included 198 sailors and 551 soldiers, for a total of 749 dead, the costliest training incident in World War II. The strictest of secrecy followed this event for fear of the enemy not knowing what it had accomplished. No one lifted the order of secrecy, and after the final invasion and with time, the event received little attention until 1971. At that point, a British citizen named Ken Small moved to an area on the coast of Slapton Sands, and he discovered military-type debris on the beach and made inquiries as the circumstances. After a great deal of communication with various individuals and relevant organizations, he learned the details of the tragedy. He wanted to honor these U.S. servicemen, and through his efforts and at his own personal expense, he had the tank raised and lifted, and he had it erected and dedicated an Exercise Tiger Memorial on the beach. The Exercise Tiger Memorial that we have here in the city has been here for 30 years, and that was through the efforts of a man named Joe Theodore. Many of you may know him. If not, he was a great man with vision and patriotism. When he heard about the details of this event, this forgotten tragedy, he wanted it to be known, and he decided to create the Exercise Tiger Memorial Committee. We do have one of the original members here of the Exercise Tiger Memorial Committee. If you could please rise, we have Mr. Jim Wagner. So Mr. Theodore urged his fellow Americans to join him in seeking special recognition for Exercise Tiger. He started a writing letter campaign proposing resolutions at all levels of government. And suddenly he conceived the idea of twin monuments across the sea. So he formed the Exercise Tiger Memorial Committee. And the Exercise Tiger Memorial Committee and the Exercise Tiger Memorial is the first of its kind in the United States. So that's something to be proud of as residents of the city of New Bedford. Originally, on August 4th, 1989, the memorial was originally located at the Andrews Dayhill, post 1531 over on Park Street. There was a very nice dedication and ceremony there. One of our guests of honor today, Winfred Polzin, was a member of LST 507 who recently passed away. He has family members here, and Mr. Polzin was one of the individuals that served on LST 507 that was at that ceremony. So that's special to have his family here. His son-in-law, Paul, and his daughter, Mary Darrow of Minnesota, are here today. So we thank them for coming. So when the museum was opened here, Mr. Theodore urged the city to have the tank relocated to this spot so more people could learn about Exercise Tiger. And it sits proudly there with a beautiful mosaic stone laid stars and plaques that honor the 749 servicemen that were lost during that time. So Mr. Theodore and the members of the Exercise Tiger Memorial Committee for that time, that was great that they had done that. First of its kind in the United States, and we're lucky to carry it on, that tradition, and try to help future generations learn of that event. So we're lucky to have that. Tomorrow in Torcross, England, the Exercise Tiger Memorial Committee of the UK, founded by Mr. Ken Small, his son, Dean Small, will be conducting Exercise Tiger Memorial service at Slapton Sands. And we have a message from Dean Small carrying on the legacy of his father, Ken. We will be thinking of you today as you commemorate the 75th anniversary of Exercise Tiger. We will be holding a service at our Sherman Tank Memorial in England at Slapton Sands on the day to remember those who died for the cause of freedom. We are so grateful that a sister tank memorial site has been established in New Bedford. Although we are thousands of miles apart, we are bound by a common purpose to remember all those who died on April 28, 1944. May they never be forgotten. So I'd like to give applause for that. During the planning of this ceremony and learning more about Exercise Tiger, there is a wonderful resource. A woman named Lori Bolton, who's from Kingsburg, California. Her uncle, Louis Archer Bolton, was killed during Exercise Tiger. Miss Bolton and her uncle share the same birthday. Although Lori was born 8 years after Louis, she wanted to know more about her uncle, and she really became interested in Exercise Tiger. And she was part of a Smithsonian documentary that details the event of Exercise Tiger. She basically unfolded the pages of history to make sure that proper recognition and those members are properly recognized for their service in Exercise Tiger. And she is quoted as saying, "This memorial is so important to the family members, as it is an acknowledgement of the tragedy and recognition to the lives lost." So again, we're lucky and thankful that you could all attend this service today. I'd like to introduce you now to the City of New Bedford Veterans Advisory Board Chairman, our civilian member, Mr. Robert Bromley.
What I wanted to do is each year, for each anniversary event, we named the members of the Veterans Advisory Board. With us here today is Mr. Bruce Stewart. He's the Vice Chairman, U.S. Army, Vietnam veteran. Mr. Christopher Gomes is the Secretary of our board. He's also the city's Veteran Service Officer. He is U.S. Army, retired OIF. We have Mr. Randall Motter, U.S. Army, Persian Gulf. Ms. Karen Cosme, U.S. Air Force. Mr. Christopher Holtkamp, U.S. Marine Corps, OEF, OIF. One of our newest members, Mr. Daniel Goulart, U.S. Navy retired, Navy SEAL, OIF, OEF, and many other places that he can tell you today he was at. But especially, we'd like to give recognition to our Colonel. Colonel Grace Regan, retired U.S. Air Force, Vietnam. She would always be with us. And I think she is still with us right now. We are losing her. And over the last few days, as many of us have called in to check on her, her family just says they don't know why she made it through the night. Maybe it's because she wanted to still be in spirit to be with us here today, as she would always be sitting either inside or outside as we did the service. So if I have just a moment of silence so we can just give some thoughts to the Colonel. Thank you. Like many of our members of the board who are present, we have also lost some over the past few months, in the past year. We've lost past members Bill Moran, Ollie Moreau, both of them are U.S. Navy, World War II. We lost recently Mr. Danny Nadu, U.S. Navy, Korea, Vietnam eras. When we look at those that we lost, and then I think about veterans when we first started Exercise Tiger, the survivors that were with us, there's a saying that I once heard as the veterans from World War I were leaving us. When they came back with their memories, their recollections. They then stepped off into their remembrances to ensure that their services are not forgotten. And as they've all started going, they are now stepping off into the pages of history. And it's fortunate that as we've had the memorial here in the city, that we have had many of those survivors that actually took part of it, sit, talk to us, speak to us. And it's kind of, it's very sad that we just do not have that ability to talk to them anymore. At this point here, I'd like to call recognition to our City Veteran Service Officer, Chris Gomes, who is always giving us a tremendous amount of service to the board and helping us get everything together. And as well as Mr. Peter Clark, where I don't know where he disappeared on me here, but Pete has been the spearhead for the board as an ex officio member for Exercise Tiger, and is always willing to take on extra roles as we come up with different projects for us to do. Pete's right there. Pete, if you I just want to. At this point, we're going to be going into our speaking part of the program, and as such, I will like to introduce the Honorable Mayor of the City of New Bedford, Jonathan F. Mitchell.
Well, thank you, everybody, and thanks for coming out today. We wish the weather were a little bit better, but just as well, we're all here, and it's great to see so many familiar faces. I want to begin today with words of thanks, and there are many of them. But I'd like to start first of all with the Veterans Advisory Board and for all their work year long, every single day to make sure that New Bedford honors its veterans in a way befitting both them and New Bedford. And it is with great pride that we have a city that exalts military service in ways that are so conspicuous, and especially today. I want to thank, in particular, Bob, and as well, of course, as our Director of Veteran Services, Chris Gomes, for the work they do. And I want to thank Peter Clark for his leadership in this particular ceremony, which I'll offer a few words about in a second. I want to thank all the public officials who are here today. I'll be calling up Congressman Keating in a second, who's been a real stalwart for veterans benefits and veterans honoring in his time in Congress. And I also want to thank, I want to note a couple of, I want to thank my good friend Phil McGovern for being here today. We look forward to the Lieutenant Colonel's keynote address, but know that our keynote speaker today is someone who has distinguished himself as a public servant in so many ways, both in the theater of operations as well as back home and at every level of government. And so, Phil, it's a real treat to see you here today. I didn't even know you were coming until I looked at the program. I said, oh, Phil McGovern's going to be, this is great. I also wanted to salute the Ricciardi family. We miss your father. He passed away a few months ago, and he was always the bright spot of this event every year. Always here until he was the last, really the last remaining survivor. But he was a firefighter, a career firefighter in the city of Worcester, and then later moved to Cape Cod in his retirement years. But it was always we could always count on him, and you could always count on him with a few great words of inspiration as well. And so we're so glad that you guys are here today. And I want you to know that New Bedford really misses him. And I would just ask, and I'm glad, Bob, you recognized Grace Regan, who's been struggling of late, as many of you know. And I would just ask that everybody keep her in your prayers. She has devoted years and years of her time and optimistic energy to the city and to veterans in particular. And we certainly think of her today as we honor the men who were lost as part of Exercise Tiger. Today, this is a ceremony that we do every year, and I have to say it's an occasion where I'd be hard pressed to say it wasn't it would be hard pressed to say that was a greater any other occasion that's a greater source of pride for me as the mayor of New Bedford. And let me just sort of share with you why. This is an unusual military ceremony. It's unusual in the sense that ordinarily we honor service, certain types of service, right? We commemorate great battles. We commemorate great individual deeds on the battlefield. We commemorate the signing of peace treaties. We commemorate events that we most closely and ordinarily associate with acts of heroism. Of course, that's fitting and appropriate. We as a society owe that to our veterans, and we owe that to our republic, to revere acts of selflessness that are beyond the call of duty, for sure. This one has always been different. It's always been different because it was a training exercise, and different because not only was it a training exercise, but at least for a certain period of time, there was a legitimate justification for not letting the enemy know that it had happened, right? But then it became forgotten. That's the real tragedy of Exercise Tiger, it seems to me. War, and we have many veterans in our presence. We have a number of folks who have served on the field of battle in our midst, and they'd be quick to tell you that in ways that are hard for civilians to understand, that things get messy on the battlefield. Things get messy at sea. There is, of course, the saying that in battle there is the fog of war, and that chaos often reigns, unpredictability reigns. And so it is that in every war, in every conflict, there are a great number of folks who die as a result of friendly fire. There are many non-combatants killed. There are many who are killed in training exercises. There are many who are killed in training exercises in times of peace. Everybody who's served at one point or another has been in a live fire exercise, and sometimes those go wrong. There are military aircraft that crash. These things happen, but we don't ordinarily have ceremonies to mark those occasions. But it's entirely fitting and appropriate that we do have occasions to honor those who signed up, who swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, to defend the country and the Republic, because it wasn't their choice to be put in any given position of peril at any given point in time. Orders come from above, missions are executed, and folks do their duty. And it's not their choice ultimately. It's their choice to sign up, And in our republic, we are fortunate that we have so many who do. And the reality is that we need to honor those folks. In the case of Exercise Tiger, you had an unusually large mistake, right, that happened. And so it is that, or a series of mistakes that had happened. But those men deserve our highest reverence. And they deserve it not only for their own sake and their families, of course, but also for those who are serving now. We collectively, as a people, need to convey to them that what they're doing matters. So for that kid who's out on patrol off of some forward operating base in the hills of Afghanistan, he needs to know that, even though his friends are back home and maybe playing video games and hanging out, that what he's doing there in that particular place and time matters. It's the kid who's on the deck on watch in the middle of the night, in the middle of the sea on a destroyer, who's wondering, maybe I would have liked being back home a little bit more right now. That sounds pretty good to me. He needs to know, or she needs to know, that what they're doing matters. Or it's that kid who's even on post somewhere in the United States, whose orders haven't come to deploy, who's engaged in a training exercise. And again, training exercises are themselves dangerous, because if they're not dangerous, they're not realistic, and therefore not nearly as useful. He or she needs to know that what they're doing matters. And so I wish every one of them could see what we're doing here today in New Bedford, that we're honoring folks who signed up, who did what their country asked them to do, and executed it, and who paid the ultimate price. Thank you for being here today. I really do mean it, and I think that everybody, that New Bedford should continue to set the example it sets for service, for patriotism, and for honoring veterans. And with all that, I want to introduce my good friend, Congressman Bill Keating, who again is here today to echo the words that you've heard already, but also to honor those who served in Exercise Tiger. Congressman.
Well, thank you, Mayor Mitchell. I just want to thank all the veterans that are here, served their country so well. I want to thank their families for their service. And I want to thank the Advisory Council here and everyone that attended here for honoring those that serve our country. We're looking at a 75th anniversary of really an important event in our history, because it was a prelude to what's been termed by almost every historian as the most consequential battle in the history of humankind. That's just not hyperbole. Those are historians viewing what was at stake. Welcome the Ricciardi family for being here, and I'm sure it has special meaning to you as it does to us. Your presence here makes that more personal as well, and thank you. There's a legacy that has come from this that strikes me in particular. My own uncle was killed just a few months and a few miles away from Normandy at the time, a few months after D-Day. And as I went there myself and viewed and talked to our military people and historians there, I got a real sense of the challenge of that battle. It is enormous. Many of you have been there, but as you sit back behind where the Germans were, and you look at Point de Hook, and you look at people, including a constituent of mine who just passed away a few years ago from Plymouth, Tom Ruggiero, who was one of the Rangers that went up that, you get an idea of the courage and the magnitude of that battle. And it also has particular significance to me as a legacy today, as my role serving our country in Congress, because I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we recognize the work of our allies in this great effort, and particularly as the chairman of the Europe subcommittee, that lives today. If you go through Normandy, not just the scene itself, but if you travel a few miles back, I was moved beyond anything I could say to see homes still today with a French flag and an American flag right there in the same flagpole today. They have not forgotten what occurred and the magnitude of that as well. Also, I'm on the Armed Services Committee, and that has particular significance to what we're remembering here today and how Exercise Tiger is important as a lesson today. We're here because without that effort, without the effort of exercises like Exercise Tiger, we would not have been successful in our efforts. I think it was Vince Lombardi that said, if you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. Whether he took that from someone else, I don't know, but I'll give it to him. But this is the most significant lesson. There was enormous preparation and work necessary. And in fact, if you studied the D-Day invasion itself, that did not go without great setbacks itself. The air cover was miles off, even with all the planning. And we have to go back in time and see how far we've come today and how our technology and the assets that we give our military is so far advanced compared to what it was back then. A lesson I'll learn on the Armed Services Committee to try and provide the best that we can for those that are serving us around the world and in our country right now. But getting back to Exercise Tiger. And there are those that will say, without that, we wouldn't have been as successful. They're correct. There are those that, at the time, because of secrecy, did not want to reveal what was actually going on there because it would have jeopardized the D-Day invasion itself. And there were those afterwards that didn't want to go further and said from military standpoints that, well, this could be bad for morale to tell this story. And that's where I disagree with that decision itself. This is something we should recognize, and I'm so proud of our city here being the place, the center point in our country for remembering this and having that sister city relationship across. It's kind of ironic that the neighboring city in both senses, Dartmouth. Yet we're here celebrating this today, and we should celebrate the contribution of those today. Remember it. Be thankful and grateful for that. The things they learned because of that preparation was essential. They learned that the radio communications they were using was not adequate. They learned the life vest and the equipment they had was unsatisfactory and indeed lethal to those people that would be part of that invasion. They understood, in many respects, that the things that weren't successful there would make us successful later. And there is no doubt in my mind that that exercise saved countless lives of our soldiers and our ally soldiers in the invasion and was instrumental to the success. So I'm proud of our city for remembering that, and I'd like to just briefly present a citation in recognition of the 75th anniversary here in New Bedford. If the mayor wants to just come back and the members of the committee, Robert, Pete, Chris Gold. I'd just like to present a citation, special recognition from Congress, presented to the Exercise Tiger Memorial Committee in recognition of the 75th anniversary of Exercise Tiger, as you honor the brave service members who lost their lives on April 28th. You honor our country. Congratulations.
Congressman, thank you very much for that honor. At this time, I'd like to bring forward the state representative of the district here that the Exercise Tiger Memorial is in, Representative Tony Cabral.
And along with me, I bring my colleague from the north end, Chris Hendricks, Representative Hendricks from the north end. Well, good afternoon. Certainly delighted to be here. I remember 30 years ago, over on Park Street, I was there on the first inaugural day of this memorial. And Joe Theodore, as it was remembered here by Peter, was tireless, his tenacity around this issue to really create a memorial for Exercise Tiger. Almost words cannot describe that. I knew Joe personally. We talked many times around this issue. And that day, too, the House of Representatives offered a citation, at the time given actually by Representative McIntyre at the time. He was the one who officially made the presentation that day over on Park Street. But I want you to know that that's 30 years ago. And I can tell you that myself and those residents of New Bedford that I have the ability and the honor, the privilege to represent, have been there every year. Through me and through them, because this is that important. And it's always humble for me and for many of those that I represent to participate on events of this nature before folks, men and women that have put their lives on the line to make sure that we all can enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy every day in this great country of ours. It's because of you we are able to do that. It's because of you that we are able to be here today. Now, Exercise Tiger, I know in those days was secret, but as the congressman said and the mayor said, it's important to remember. Training, that's how important it was preparations for the Allies to invade Europe, to go into Europe and push back the enemy. That's important. That was important. So the mission that those 749 men were asked to do is an important mission. And I'm glad that here in New Bedford, that we should be proud as a city, as those who live here, those who live in the greater New Bedford area, we should be very proud that we are the first in the United States to recognize, officially recognize, with this memorial, Exercise Tiger. So it's because of all of you that we're able to do that. You know, New Bedford is first class when it comes to remembering, memorializing, commemorating, and celebrating its veterans and the work and the sacrifice that you have put on the line for all of us. You and your families. You and your families. Because families are also part of that mission. And families also go through struggles and challenges while you are providing the kind of work that you do every day when you are serving. And to that, we are humble, we are appreciative, we are honored to really be able to be here and be able to celebrate this occasion. I bring a citation before I read the citation and ask the Veterans Advisory Committee and the Committee on Exercise Tiger to receive it on behalf of the city. I'm going to let my colleagues say a few words.
Hello everyone, just wanted to thank everyone for being here, particularly everyone involved putting this together, Bob, Peter, and Chris. We're here to remember those at Exercise Tiger, but also the lessons that we learned from World War II. Let's not forget that authoritarianism, dictatorships, has no place in today's modern world. It was true then and it's true today. So thank you.
Robert, Peter. I gotta fix this thing. Make sure this is, okay, thank you. Well, on behalf of the House of Representatives and myself and those that I represent, be it known to all that the Massachusetts House of Representatives offers its sincerest congratulations to the City of New Bedford, Exercise Tiger, in recognition of your 30th anniversary of the Exercise Tiger Memorial, in the first in the United States, and to the dedicated veteran community who continue to honor those who have given the ultimate sacrifice. The entire membership extends its very best wishes and expresses the hope for future good fortune and continued success in all endeavors given. And we dated it the 28th. We know today's the 27th, but we dated the 28th because that's the actual date of Exercise Tiger anniversary, given on the 28th day of April 2019 at the State House by Speaker Robert A. DeLeo and offered myself and the rest of the delegation from New Bedford. Oh, there we go. Thanks. Thank you.
although he could not be here with us today, we have a citation from the governor. Commonwealth of Massachusetts Exercise Tiger Memorial. On behalf of the citizens of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I am pleased to confer upon the City of New Bedford Veterans Advisory Board this governor's citation in recognition of the 75th anniversary of Exercise Tiger pre-D-Day rehearsal mission that took place on April 28, 1944, and the 30th anniversary of the memorial to commemorate the courage of the soldiers and sailors who rendered the ultimate sacrifice on that day. Given this 28th day of April in the year 2019, Charles D. Baker, Governor, Karen E. Polito, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Today, we're honored to have families of service members who were involved in Exercise Tiger. I'd like to introduce one of our guests today, is Pastor Judson Adams. He's from the Cape Cod. We'd like to call you up. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Veterans Advisory Board for allowing me to be here, and especially like to thank Mr. Clark for this invitation. Today I would like to share with you a little bit about my great uncle, John William Brumfield. He was a member of the 33rd Chemical Warfare Service in the United States Army, and he was aboard the LST 507 when the German E-boats attacked at 2:04 in the morning off the Slapton Sands in the English Channel. John William Brumfield was born on March 10th, 1942, and bravely laid down his life for our country. Known as Billy to his friends and family, he was only 20 years old when he lost his life. Billy was a quite quiet country boy who spent most of his time squirrel hunting in the hills of southern Ohio. My father told me that when he was a kid, he would find birch trees outside of his grandmother's house, where Billy had carved his initials into. Although my father was born after the death of Billy, he would find a sense of family bonding when he would find Billy's initials carved into those trees, and he would often carve his initials under Billy's. There was a scar that was placed upon our family on April 28, 1944, and this wound was compounded by the fact that for many years our family didn't know the truth about what had happened to my Uncle Billy. For almost 40 years, no one knew, not my great-grandmother or my 7 aunts and uncles, of what had happened to Billy. I'm so thankful for a service like today that allows us to honor the sacrifice of those great men. President John F. Kennedy stated that the greatest revolution is of those determined to be free, in history of past, present, and future. I believe that we must teach the younger generations about this greatest generation and how through their dedication and sacrifice, we can embrace life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I believe, as Congressman Keating said, General Eisenhower was afraid of how this might affect the morale of the other men preparing for D-Day. You know, we can look back now with hindsight and see 2020. That when Americans are faced with evil, we will unite together, we will rise up, we will fight, and we will be victorious over that. As a pastor, I am especially thankful for the freedoms that we enjoy. One of those freedoms being the freedom of religion. In Scripture, one can find that God commanded the children of Israel to build monuments to remember battles and important moments. God wanted those monuments to be erected so that the sacrifices would never be forgotten. On days like today, we remember the fallen because they are not forgotten. We celebrate our freedom because we know that freedom is not free. I believe the men that have exercised Tiger are an outstanding example of a verse in John chapter 15 that Jesus said these words, "Greater love has no man than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends."
Thank you, Pastor. We did receive some communication that I'd like to read from the United States Exercise Tiger Commemorative Foundation. We're proud that they were able to present us with a citation, and I'd like to present that citation to Pastor Adams and his family. Okay, I am going to read the letter of encouragement from Ms. Susan Haynes, our National Director of the Exercise Tiger Commemorative Foundation. I send warm greetings from the state of Missouri and wish you all an outstanding ceremony. We can never forget the past, especially when it involves our nation's most prized resource, our veterans and military. This is why ceremonies like you are having today are so important. Exercise Tiger in the battle that the U.S. Navy convoy of Tango 4, radio call sign Taffy 4, fought ranks among our nation's most overlooked battles of World War II. And while it was secret before D-Day, the keeping it a secret only let time and history march on as those LSTs and those brave sailors and soldiers who died were never fully given the respect they deserve. As you gather at your U.S. Army Tank Memorial, we in Missouri will be gathered at our U.S. Navy LST Anchor Memorial Site to remember the 75th anniversary of this historic naval engagement and those who never came home. We honor the legacy of Tiger and the lessons learned that were issued in D-Day that saved hundreds of our boys. I commend Joe Theodore, and I'm sure he is with you today in his spirit and is quite proud what he had started is still going. Also, there are others here today that we are at the United States Exercise Tiger Foundation are proud of and to honor with our Medal of Combat Valor. You know the story, but I still find it amazing that 8 lumbering LSTs over 300 feet long faced an enemy that had 800-foot fast torpedo boats, E-boats as they were known, that were combat veterans already sinking British warships in the months prior to Exercise Tiger. More would not have been sunk if not for the heroic actions that night. In closing, I will repeat what former Secretary of the Navy Ray Mabus said in 2015. What could have been the Navy's darkest hour became one of its most shining moments in naval amphibious warfare. Truly, it was the LST's finest hours. Best wishes for a memorable tribute. Signed, Susan Haynes, National Executive Director. So on behalf of Susan, I'd like to present a Medal of Combat Valor to the Adams family on behalf of their uncle. This is on behalf of We're also lucky enough to have another family member of Vincent Ricciardi. Vincent served on LST 54, and Vincent in the past has been a member of this ceremony. So we'd like to welcome his son, Vincent Jr., today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you all for being here. On behalf of the extended Ricciardi family, I would like to express our gratitude and thanks for all of you, all of what you have done in memory of all those who served in Exercise Tiger. Your annual recognition of this tragic but yet meaningful and helpful World War II training mission is a fitting tribute to the brave Americans who lost their lives on that fateful April day in 1944. Our dad appreciated with all his heart and soul the United States Exercise Tigers Foundation and the New Bedford Veterans Advisory Board's efforts to recognize the veterans and the military members who were overlooked for so many years. Once again, thank you, and may God bless all of you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we also have Susan and Dale Williams. Miss Williams' father was the late pharmacist mate first class, William O'Connor, who served on LST 54 along with Vincent. And they're here, right back there. Please stand to be recognized. Miss Williams shared a story with me how after the events of Exercise Tiger and LST 54 found themselves designated as a hostile ship and conducted many assaults in support of the assault on Omaha Beach. As a physician's mate first class, he was quickly elevated to the rank as an all-hands sailor, doing whatever it took to fulfill the mission. And he could be seen as more than medicine at that case. So we thank you for your attendance today. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the Souza family. We have James and Thelma Souza and John Souza, who will come up and speak on behalf of Petty Officer Third Class Louis Souza, who was an Exercise Tiger survivor on LST 51, a native of New Bedford.
On behalf of the Souza family, I'd like to thank you all for being here on this 75th anniversary of Exercise Tiger. This committee does a great job every year reminding us all of this terrible tragedy and loss of life during such a critical time in our nation's history. My Uncle Lou served as a radio man and telegrapher on the LST 511, and he was fortunate to survive on April 28, 1944. Just 39 days later, he and all on board the LST 511 continued on with their mission on D-Day, and eventually made over 50 trips to Omaha and Utah Beach in the weeks and months that followed. My uncle died in 2014 at the age of 90, and his spirit and our family will always be grateful to the city of New Bedford for honoring his service and for honoring the souls of the brave 749. Thank you.
Board member Robert Bromley knows military history like no other. I think we can all agree upon that. He is very educated in that. He knows the finest of details. But I think he might have met his match. I think you're all in for a treat now. So sit back, get comfortable. We're lucky enough today to have the Dorrow family, Paul and Mary. Mary is the daughter of Winfred Polson, who was an Exercise Tiger survivor of LST 504. Mr. Dorrow knows his history, I can tell you that, and he's going to give you a first-hand account that he has heard over the years from Winfred. So, Mr. Dorrow from Minnesota, we'd like to welcome you. Please come up.
My name is Paul Dorrow. This is my wife, Mary. Mary's father was on Exercise Tiger. On behalf of the family of Winfred Paulzine, Mary and I would like to thank all involved for this opportunity to speak about Winfred's service in World War II. We're very honored. And I would also like to acknowledge everyone here that is a veteran or current military with a big thank you. Now, I do have a question that I would like to ask, and it's for my own personal information. Who in this room has a member who was on Exercise Tiger? Just raise your hand. This is just for me. Now, who has a member that was either on the 289 or the 531? Raise your hand. Family member? Okay, now, I know this one. This one, who has a family member that was on the 507? Raise your hand. Okay, good. I want to talk to you folks afterwards, too. I'm going to be telling you a story, basically. Winfred would tell this story, but unfortunately Winfred is no longer here to be able to do it, so I'm going to do it on behalf of him. Winfred is what we believe the oldest Army survivor off of the 507. He was 100 years, 5 months old when he passed away on the 24th of February this year. We were kind of hoping he would have been able to be here for the 75th anniversary, but it really wasn't meant to be. So I became interested in military history, and now this is going to date me, and I'm sure everybody here is going to know this too, but because of a TV series that they made in the late 50s and the 1960s called Combat. Who remembers Combat? Quite a few people, I'm sure. I wanted to find out more about individual stories, so I started asking questions, and I started talking to the individual veterans. Consequently, I've talked to many veterans, both from World War I and World War II, both Americans and German, about their personal experiences. Some of them telling stories to them that were amusing, and others that were awful, depending on, the circumstances and whether the vet is willing to talk about it. We had a veteran who worked for my father who never ever spoke about his military service. And I am a military vehicle restorer. I do restorations on World War II military vehicles. I finally got him. I was working on a 1943 Ford GPW Jeep. And he came up and he said, I haven't seen one of those in 50 years. And we started talking, and I found out he was a member of the 45th Infantry Division. And I know that the 45th Infantry Division liberated Dachau concentration camp. And I asked him if he was in Dachau, and he said he was one of the first people through the front gate. Never spoke about his story to anybody, but it was kind of like the floodgates opened up. He started telling me, and he talked to me for about 3 hours on this thing. He never told his family, and when he passed away last year, his family never knew anything about, what he did, but he did tell me, and I did relay this to his family, and they were very, very appreciative. I became interested in Winfred's story because of my relationship with his daughter here. And honestly, Mary was first and Winfred was second on this, So Winfred is the second oldest of 5 brothers. 4 of his brothers served in combat in World War II. Winfred was born on September 3rd, 1918 in South Dakota. And when you stop and think about that, World War I was still going on at the time. The Battle of San Miguel took place only a few days after that, on September 12th of 1918. He went to Brookings School of Agriculture, and he took ROTC when he was in the School of Agriculture. Winfred enlisted on January 23rd, 1942 at Fort Snelling. He took his basic training at Camp Custer, Wyoming, and he made the comment, he said he didn't think any place could be colder than the state of Minnesota, but he found out that Wyoming was one of them. So then they sent him to Camp Normoil, Texas, where his military occupation specialty was a motorcycle mechanic, and he worked on WLA 45 Harleys. When the Harley was no longer in need as a reconnaissance vehicle because they came out with the Jeep, he was transferred to a unit that's right here. This is the 1st Engineer Special Brigade. And he was in the 478th Amphibian Truck Company. He left for overseas from Camp Edwards, Massachusetts. He was a sergeant that was an amphibian truck driver known as a DUC. And DUC is not an acronym. DUC is actually a manufacturer's code. D stands for 1942, U stands for utility amphibious, K stands for all-wheel drive, and W stands for 2 powered rear axles. Now, Winfred was involved in Operation Torch, which was the invasion of North Africa. So he was on the initial invasion. He was on the invasion of Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, in Sicily, and then he was in Italy. Now, another interesting thing, Winfred met his brother Orville in Sicily and in Italy both. Orville was a member of the 776 Tank Destroyer Battalion, and he was a radio man on a Jeep. Basically, Winfred was driving down the road, and he happened to see the sign off on the side of the road that said 776 TD, Tank Destroyer. And he went in and talked to an NCO, and he said, my brother's in this unit. The NCO went and put Winfred in front of the commanding officer, and he asked him what he was doing there, and he said, well, my brother is Orville. And he said, well, he told the NCO, he said, well, don't just stand around, go get his brother. So, but he saw him 2 times. And when he was in Italy, they took the ducks away from him and they gave him 2.5-ton CCKW 353s, which are 2.5-ton 6x6s. He hauled fuel in the mountains, and Winfred was always animated when he was telling his story, and sometimes it was quite amusing. He said the mountain roads were wide enough for a vehicle, and he said if he looked over the side, he said it was like a 1,000-foot drop. And in a lot of cases, that was probably true. But he said when the Germans were retreating, what they did was they blew the bridges, so they had to go down the hill and up the hill. And he said when you were going down the hill, he said your head was below your feet, and when you were going up the hill, he said your feet were above your head. So then he was involved in Exercise Tiger. He was back in England, came back across on Exercise Tiger. He was with Convoy T4, the Brixham section, which consisted of the LST 499, the LST 289, and the 507. 507 was at the end of the convoy. The convoy was attacked by S-boats from the 9th S-boat flotilla based in Cherbourg. 507 was the first one hit by the S-130. Now, the S-130 was commanded by Oberleutnant zur See Gunther Raby. And here's another thing. Of all the S-boats that was made, there was hundreds of German S-boats, and they were an armored S-boat, very close to what a PT boat was, but they were heavily armored. Of all the S-boats that were made, the S-130 is the only surviving S-boat. There's no other S-boats. It's currently under restoration in England. I know the individual that's doing the restoration on it. So realistically, Winfred and the S-boat, Winfred, I'd like to say Winfred is, but Winfred was, the two are basically the sole survivors of this. The torpedo hit in the stern engine, and as soon as the torpedo hit, all the electricals went out on the LST. Immediate fires started in the tank deck. Now, this is Winfred telling the story. Winfred was a detail guy, too, and he could tell this story. He could relate this story up to 6 months before he died. He was just absolutely sharp on this. He said when you were in an LST, he said there was 22 amphibian trucks that could be put into the tank deck. There was 3 rows of 7 and 1 on the end, so you could put the 22s in that way. Now, with his particular LST, he was not on his LST. If he would have been on the LST, we wouldn't be standing here talking today. He was on the one that was closest to the watertight door leading out. However, they had the watertight doors closed. Now, when the torpedo hit him and a platoon sergeant, he said he couldn't believe that he could actually open it up, because he said when the Navy closed the doors, he said they actually physically used a pipe to close the doors down. And he said, well, I guess when you get excited, sometimes you don't know your own strength. But what ended up happening is he was able to open the watertight doors. He got the watertight doors up, and him and the platoon sergeant were the only 2 that made it out of the tank deck alive. But when he came out of the tank deck, basically what he said was he turned around and he looked, and he said he looked down the tank deck, and he said there was imminent fires going on among the whole tank deck. And he said guys were standing on top of their amphibian trucks, they were screaming, and basically when he got out, he said the platoon sergeant came out also too. I believe, and I don't have it here, but I think the platoon sergeant's name, I do have it, and I will relate that. When they got out, Winfred said to the Navy personnel, he said, there's still guys down there, because you could hear them screaming, and they said, we have orders, and they closed the watertights on them. So The gentleman's name, we believe, was Sergeant Bernard Davenport. He was a platoon sergeant that was in Winfred's unit. And Winfred said that he thought he died of hypothermia in the water, so he didn't make it. He got to the tank, he got to the deck when the order was given to abandon ship. And here's another thing, Winfred in his detail. He took off all his clothes. He took off all his, not all his clothes, but he took off his jacket, he took off his helmet, and he took off his boots. And he told me, he said, you know, Paul, he said, the 1st Engineer Special Brigade was issued paratrooper boots. He said, we weren't issued low quarters. He said, we weren't issued buckle top boots. And he said, I know they were paratrooper boots because he said they've got a cut on the back heel. So he said they were paratrooper boots. But he took off his paratrooper boots. He let himself down. They put a cargo net over the bow because the stern was going down on the 507. So he lowered himself down into the water off of the cargo net, and he said, oh, that water was just terribly cold. But Winfred was kind of, you know, he wouldn't tell specific stories sometimes. Winfred basically, when he was back in England before he left, he said there were specific things, and they told guys to grab things out of boxes. One of the things that they did say to take was, I'm going to tell it, you know. So anyways, they said to take condoms. So anyways, Winfred took a couple of condoms and he put them in his pocket. Now, when he was on the LST and the LST was going down, he had a watch. He had a wristwatch. And he thought to himself, I'm going to take the wristwatch, and he said, I'm going to put it in the condom. And he put it back into his pocket. Well, when he got down into the water, he had it in his pocket. When it came time, when he got onto shore, they were looking around for somebody who actually had a running watch. And his was the only one that was running because of having it in the condom. So also, too, when he was in the water, they issued life belts that were short, narrow life belts that were either inflated by hand or by CO2 cartridges. Now, these life belts were actually designed to go up here underneath. They weren't designed to go around your waist. What a lot of these guys would do when they put these life belts on is they'd put them under their waist, and they would have, you guys don't have field packs on, but they'd have field packs and what have you on, and it would flip them over in the water, and consequently they would drown. There was a gentleman that was, Winfred was in England at the time, and he happened to be walking by a course where they were talking about what to do if a person is dragging you under the water and how to save yourself, and he happened to pay attention to this. Well, this gentleman basically was pulling him under the water, and he didn't have a life vest on. And Winfred basically pushed him away. He said he put his feet into his chest, and he pushed him away. He said he turned around, and he saw a floating life belt. So he grabbed the life belt, and he threw it to this guy, and of course when he turned around, he said the guy was gone. And he said, you know something, when something like that happens to you, he said you'll never forget about that for the rest of your life. And he said he never did. The LST 515 came back against orders and picked these guys up. Winfred was in the water for probably 45 minutes to an hour, and he was a tough old bird. I mean, for somebody that could go to 100 years old, we always said he had 9 lives, and unfortunately he just finally used up his last one. But many, many things happened to Winfred over the years, and we're just absolutely floored that he could. So anyways, the LST 515 came back, disobeyed orders. The captain was court-martialed because of this. And I think in certain instances, the court-martial probably was worth it, because in the captain's own mind, he probably did the right thing. You know, as far as not as far as orders, but as far as doing it, I think he probably did. There is some people that are from Columbus, Ohio, that came to see Winfred last year, or was it a couple of years ago? Last fall, they came to see Winfred because their father, his name was Joe Kennedy. It's no relation to the Kennedys from Massachusetts. He was evidently from Ohio. He was a staff sergeant in the 478th, and Winfred knew him. And anyways, they wanted to talk to Winfred because their father knew Winfred. Anyways, they were there for 3 days, and they are working on this Exercise Tiger Memorial, the one that's online. So if you want to go online, you can actually go online and run up exercisetiger.com, and you can actually hear Winfred and actually see him, in his own words, telling about his exercise tiger and his other military service. Anyways, they told the story. Tom and Tim Kennedy are their names, and Tom is the son of Joe Kennedy. He was a staff sergeant. They did not know, there was a sergeant here, his name was Staff Sergeant Albert NMI, no middle initial. Malaker is his name. He was a coal miner from Pennsylvania, and he was just promoted to Staff Sergeant. Now, Tom told Winfred that he didn't know if the Army actually told them to switch or if they did it voluntarily, however they did. But Staff Sergeant Kennedy and Staff Sergeant Larker, basically who was just recently promoted to Staff Sergeant, switched places from the 507 to the 289. Kennedy ended up on the 289. Malaker ended up on the 507. Kennedy made the comment to Malaker, and it's kind of a chilling comment that he actually made. He said, you should be proud of the fact being that you're now made a staff sergeant. He said, you're going to be making more money. And Malaker said to Kennedy, he said, I'm never going to live long enough to get a check. And basically that's exactly what happened. Winfred also said First Lieutenant Harold Powell, he was the first lieutenant of the 478th, jumped off the side of the LST rather than taking the cargo net down, and he had his helmet on with his chin strap, and Winfred said as soon as he hit the water he broke his neck and it killed him. There's another person who we have from St. Paul that went out to see Winfred last year, talked to him, because they wanted to know if Winfred knew their relative. His name is Private Thomas Reibel. His aunt is Barb Arndt, and they were basically from St. Paul. And Winfred said because he was a private, he didn't really know who he was. Winfred knew all the T4s, the T5s, who were the drivers of the amphibian trucks. But anyways, needless to say, that was good enough for her just to know that somebody was on board the LST that actually knew her uncle was good enough for her. And we've remained in very, very close contact with her. And they said basically her brother went through all the entire years not knowing what happened to his brother, never knowing. And I always felt bad, but she said this really actually gave them closure. Winfred said to him that, Private Reibel probably was more than likely in the tank deck at the time because he would have been on board either probably as an assistant driver of a duck. Winfred then actually was involved in Operation Overlord, the invasion of D-Day on the 6th of June. Winfred spoke German, and they wanted to make him into a translator. However, they brought prisoners back from Cherbourg, and I'm assuming they were probably Kriegsmarine coastal units. And anyways, Winfred, and he said they're changing oil in a 2.5-ton truck over there. So he said, if you want to, he said, you can go and do this. Anyways, needless to say, the German soldier went up and he got the oil out of the deal and polished his boots, and he sat down and he spoke to Winfred, and he said to Winfred, he said, did the U.S. or did the Germans torpedo many U.S. ships? And Winfred said yes. He said, I suppose the Germans actually did. And he said, he said, as I came up over the top of the hill, now this is the German NCO talking, he said, as I came up over the top of the hill, and he said, I saw all of these ships on the horizon. He said, I thought to myself, how they lied to us. And he said, Winfred said he had tears running down his face. And so Winfred kept on talking to him, and needless to say, Winfred wasn't armed at the time or anything, but he was laying up against the side of a tree, and he fell asleep. And he said when the German was done taking care of himself and polishing his boots, he came over and he shook Winfred's shoulder, and he said, I'm ready to go. And that's all he said, because the war was over for him. So actually what he did, he was a beach master in charge of offloading and unloading cargo from ship to shore on D-Day on Utah Beach. He returned to the States, and he went to Fort Lewis, Washington, and he was a training instructor for many things, including the M1 rifle. And he got married to Mary's mother, Dallas, on January 1945. There was 3 daughters, and I got one of the 3, so yeah. So After Tiger was declassified, because he never really knew what he was on. He never really knew because it was a secret mission. They basically told him when he got to shore, you don't know nothing, you didn't hear nothing, you didn't say nothing, because if you do, you're going to be court-martialed. After Tiger was declassified in 1984, he found out what it was, and so he started talking about it. And somebody asked him, they said, why didn't you say anything? And his answer to that was, he said, I didn't think anybody cared. And you know what? That's not true. And I can see that here. I can see that here. He was born again on the 3rd of September, 1918. Joined the service at almost the very beginning and seeing it through to successful completion. The war ended on the 2nd of September, 1945. He had enough points. You had a point system where he had to have 85 points to get out. I counted his points. He had 97. He was discharged on the 4th of September, 1945, the day after his birthday. Now, you know what? I can't imagine how much more proud that anybody could be to have something happen, the war ending, being discharged, and having seen the whole thing through to a successful completion. Winfred received 1 campaign arrowhead, 4 battle stars, the Victory Medal, the Mediterranean and ETO Service Medal, good conduct, the French Croix de Guerre with palms, and he got that for his invasion on D-Day. And on July of last year, it was July, right? Last year, we put Winfred in for the French Legion of Honor, and we were kind of hoping that he would have been able to receive it. However, it will be a posthumous award. Winfred recently, when he was put into assisted living, a question was asked to him, in your life, what are you the most proud of? And his answer was his military service. 4 days before he passed away, we saw him. And the first question that I asked him, because him and I always talked about everything that he did in his service, the first question that I asked him, because he'd been falling and he'd been hitting his head, and that wasn't doing him any good. But the question I asked him, and I said, you know, what was the date that you joined the service? And he said, January 23rd, 1942. So in closing, I'd like to make a comment that George Patton made. Now, George Patton made a lot of interesting comments, and there's some of the comments that I really can't say here. But, but anyways, this is one that I made at his funeral, and I think it's very, very fitting to also say this here, too. George Patton said, it's foolish and wrong to mourn the men who died. Rather, we should thank God that such men live. And I would say, Godspeed, Winfred Paulzine, and thank you for this opportunity for me to speak for Winfred.
You guys need to stretch your legs for a second. Stretch your legs. We've been standing for a little while. All right, you can flex it out. All right. All right, great. Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. That's a very detailed story, and that's remarkable. That's what we're here for, to hear that kind of detail and the love that he had for his father-in-law and the daughter for her father. Next, we're honored to have here today the Assistant Chief of Staff of the Massachusetts Army National Guard. Lieutenant Colonel Phil McGovern has over 27 years of military service. In 1991, after graduating from Suffolk University Law School, he enlisted in the Army National Guard as a part-time anti-armor infantry soldier. 3 years later, he was commissioned as an infantry lieutenant and served at all levels of company grade leadership. He has also had assignments as judge advocate. In 2008, he transferred to the regular Army as a strategic plans and policy officer with assignments to the 10th Mountain Division. the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C., and the 3rd Army, U.S. Army Central Command. In 2018, he returned to the Massachusetts Army National Guard. He has deployed 4 times. Operation Joint Forge in Bosnia, 2001 to 2002. Operation Iraqi Freedom in Iraq, 2007 to 2008. Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, 2009 to 2011. And Operation Inherent Resolve in Kuwait and Iraq. Lieutenant Colonel McGovern has also served the Commonwealth and country in civilian roles as a prosecutor in the Criminal Bureau of the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office under Attorney Generals Scott Harshbarger and Tom Riley, and most recently as Senior Foreign and National Security Policy Advisor to United States Senator Edward Markey of Massachusetts, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and ranking member of its Subcommittee on East Asia, the Pacific, and International Cybersecurity Policy. He holds a BA degree in history from Merrimack College, a JD from Suffolk University, and an LLM in international law and justice from Fordham University. On behalf of the city of New Bedford, we'd like to welcome Lieutenant Colonel Philip McGovern.
Mr. Clark, on behalf of the Massachusetts National Guard and the Adjutant General of Massachusetts, Major General Gary Keefe, I'm honored to be here. Many thanks to you for your kind introduction, to the Mayor's Veterans Advisory Board for inviting the National Guard to join in today's commemoration. Mr. Mayor, thank you for the welcome to your city, my friend. John and I served as Assistant Attorneys General together back in the mid to late 90s, I think. And at the time, there were a few of us in the office who, say 3 or 4 times a week, would go out running around the Charles River. Probably one of my fonder memories of work-life balance during the day throughout my career was those runs. And on one occasion, I remember John and I were running alongside each other and chatting, and he asked me, you know, I was a lieutenant in the National Guard at the time, as the XO at Charlie Company 181 in Cambridge. He asked me, how would I go about enlisting in the Guard? I said, well, that's easy enough. We'll take care of it if you're really interested. He thought about it for a while, and he did it. And he served honorably as an enlisted soldier and then as a lieutenant. And I was certainly honored to serve with you, my friend, both in civilian capacity and in the military as soldiers. So thank you, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, in your capacity as mayor, for the welcome here today again. Congressman Keating, thank you. Members of New Bedford's state legislative delegation and city council. Many thanks to you and to the New Bedford Veterans Services Office and to the people of New Bedford for the gracious welcome and for this very impressive ceremony that truly honors the memory of great Americans who served and many who sacrificed. New Bedford takes just pride in its remembrance of those 749 soldiers and sailors killed in Exercise Tiger, to those wounded there and those who survived and took back the beaches of Normandy just 6 weeks later, and who ultimately struggled through fierce combat to Berlin, where they liberated Europe and the world from Nazi tyranny just 11 months after Exercise Tiger. To the family members with us whose loved ones served and sacrificed during the exercise, today we honor them, and we recognize all they gave in a rehearsal that became an active engagement with the enemy, the German boats that came in to a difficult, sometimes confused and confusing exercise that was held in what was an active combat zone, waters that were being violated by the Germans, British waters. They were the only available place to prepare for the great operation to come. For many years, as has been mentioned earlier, their memories were subsumed in the massive military operations that followed, and of which they were an integral part. But we're fortunate that in recent decades, you here in New Bedford, people in England, and more recently in places in other parts of the United States, have begun to specifically remember those who fell and those who participated, and those who were wounded in Operation Tiger, with the recognition and honor that their service and sacrifice demands. While those lost in Exercise Tiger are our special focus today, commemorations of wartime loss are a fitting occasion to contemplate and express gratitude for the sacrifices of all our veterans, and especially those who join us today and their families, those who represent the veterans who can't be here. To those of you who are veterans of World War II, or your family members who are here, if there are actually none present from World War II today, from the wars in Korea and Vietnam, the wars that continue in Iraq, now spread to Syria, and in Afghanistan, to those who served through what President Kennedy, in his 1961 inaugural address, called the long and bitter peace of the Cold War, and to those who have served or continue to serve in what, even earlier than that, in the late 1940s and 1950s, Senator Robert Taft of Ohio skeptically predicted would become a new status in international relations, one that was neither all-out war nor a state of peace, but a special state of semi-war. This very clearly continues today. In a very special way, all those who served in war, in peace, or in the new state that we are still trying to figure out today, share in a very special way in today's remembrance of sacrifice. 75 years sounds like a long time when you say it, but in truth, it's not long at all. For those of you who lived, likely as young children, in the 1930s and 1940s, it must seem like yesterday, literally, when you think back to it and you think of your loved ones and what they did and what they achieved. Inescapably, as time passes, memory fades. And when living memory passes, it really is on us who survive and on those who survive us one day to pay our debt to those who sacrificed, to pay society's collective debt to those who sacrificed, to honor their memory, to remember what they did and what they gave to us by doing what they did. It's important that we do so not only through words, which are very important to our individual and collective social soul, but also through our deeds, both individual and collective. On the night of June 6, 1944, D-Day, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed the American people over the radio. He led them in prayer for those fighting and dying on the beaches of Normandy. He said, in part, "For these men are lately drawn from the ways of peace. They fight not for the lust of conquest. They fight to end conquest. They fight to let justice arise, and tolerance and goodwill among all thy people. They yearn but for the end of battle, for their return to the haven of home." Roosevelt's prayer was surely meant for all Americans and allies, serving and sacrificing to defeat Nazi and fascist tyranny, those fighting and dying at that moment in Normandy, those who preceded them in sacrifice in Exercise Tiger, which has been so well described earlier as an integral part, if a tragic one, of Operation Overlord and the campaign to take Europe. and before that in North Africa, Italy, Pearl Harbor, and many other places in what was a horrific, violent global conflict, both in Europe and in Asia. As reflected in FDR's prayer, the United States and its Constitution were fundamentally committed to what he called ways of peace. Too often, in the time of World War II and since, there have been leaders who stoked war by manipulating memory. A practice which is so fundamental to doing good and doing our duty to ourselves, our communities, to our forebears, to our descendants. There have been, and still are, those who manipulate memory for the advantage of whatever it's hard to know why, but clearly it has something to do with gaining power, stoking conflict for self-advancement, most likely. I've read about its history, both in college and since. As a soldier, I've seen it play out in our own times, in Bosnia, in the Middle East, in Central Asia, and in Africa. And I've had the good fortune the past several years to be in a position where I've seen it as a civilian foreign policy advisor. Thanks to the sacrifices of the 1940s in many countries around the world, despite the fact that the human spirit does contain this dualism that causes conflict, in many countries, constitutions guarantee that the highest office is that of the citizen. Most countries today have a republican form of government, small r. They practice democracy, small d. We are among them. We are the ones that inspired it. We took our inspiration from others earlier. We weren't the inventors. We have to be humble as well. But in the generation of that came of age in the 30s and the 40s, they won it. They redeemed it. They gave the world the opportunity so that a majority of nations today would be small r republics that practice democracy and respect human rights, that live in a community of nations under the charter that was adopted by all the nations of the world just 5 years after the end of World War II under the United Nations. This gift of active citizenship is what we have and what we can thank the World War II generation for. That those who died and exercised Tiger and throughout the rest of the war died for that. And for that we have much to be grateful. On the last page of his book, Faith of My Fathers, Senator John McCain wrote that when I look back on my misspent youth, I feel a longing for what is past and cannot be restored. But though the happy pursuits and casual beauty of youth prove ephemeral, something better can endure, and endure until our last moment on earth. And that is the honor we earn and the love we give, if at a moment in our youth we sacrifice with others for something greater than our self-interest. We cannot always choose the moments. Often they arrive unbidden. We can choose to let the moments pass and avoid the difficulties they entail. But the loss we would incur by that choice is much dearer than the tribute we once paid to vanity and pleasure. The soldiers of the World War II era, the soldiers who served in Exercise Tiger, they saw their moment. Their moment came unbidden, Many volunteered, many were drafted. They responded to the call because that was what called at their moment. As President Roosevelt said, they were drawn from the ways of peace. The office that we all share equally, the office of citizen, of resident, of member of a community, is one that carries its own duties. It's one that makes calls upon us that often arrive unbidden, that require some level of sacrifice, small, and in a small percentage of circumstances, large. It can be as much as being an active and involved member of your community, volunteering for military service, or some other form of civilian service. These are the things that we are called upon to do to honor the memory of the soldiers and sailors who perished and sacrificed and served in Exercise Tiger and throughout World War II, throughout all of our wars, and what people do every day in civilian life to continually earn one day after a time what we've been given by our forebears. So thank you very much, and I appreciate the invitation to be here.
Thank you, Colonel. Nations first. Thank you very much. As we enter into our honors program, we would like to recognize any member or family member of the Merchant Marines who assisted the United States Navy in World War II operations, if there are any members in attendance. As well as any veterans of our greatest generation, the veterans of World War II. Could you please stand? Do we have his name for the record? Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Christopher Gomes will read the names of the local killed in action during Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom.
Sergeant Joseph Camara, United States Army, killed in action, New Bedford. Lance Corporal Michael Ford, United States Marine Corps, killed in action, New Bedford. Lance Corporal Patrick Gallagher, United States Marine Corps, killed in action, Fairhaven. Lance Corporal Matthew Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps, killed in action, Fairhaven. Petty Officer Second Class Tyler Trahan, United States Navy, killed in action, Freetown. Specialist Peter Enos, United States Army, killed in action, Dartmouth. We'd also like to remember the departed members of Exercise Tiger Committee. And for that, Mr. Bob Bromley, the VAB chairman, will read those names. For those who served on the committee, Mr. Joseph Theodore, United States Army. Mr. Norman Shadier, United States Army. Mr. Jamie Rigo, United States Navy. Mr. John Sachs, United States Navy. And Mr. Robert Fredericks, United States Army. Those gentlemen were instrumental in getting the tank here to New Bedford over 30 years ago. We will now be moving into our wreath and flower placing ceremony at the Exercise Tiger.
In the interest of capturing this on video and making record of it, we are going to call forward members of the Yankee Division and members of our honored guests and our delegation and family members to please rise.
Lord, we ask that you would be with our brave men and women around the world who are serving. Please keep them safe. We thank you once again for all that you've given us. And in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to give our special thanks for the closing remarks for today's ceremony. We appreciate you all coming down here for this special event. The City of New Bedford Veterans Advisory Board would like to thank the following people: Congressman William Keating, thank you very much for attending. The Office of Governor Charles Baker, the Office in Mayor Jon Mitchell, Colonel Philip McGovern, Massachusetts Army National Guard, the City Council and State Delegation, the City of New Bedford Departments of the MIS and Public Facilities for allowing us the use of the building and equipment, the Exercise Tiger National Commemorative Foundation, the Exercise Tiger Memorial of the United Kingdom, World War II reenactors, Mr. John Ramidis, a Silver Star recipient here today, and Miss Madison Roy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending. Please find your way outside and we'll begin the wreath laying momentarily. Thank you. Forward. Pull. Right. Hey. At the rock side. Forward. March. Rifle squad. Ready? Ready?